The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and cold coffee when she said it. I had the phone tucked against my shoulder, one hand wrist deep in dish soap, the other reaching for a towel that wasn't there. "Hi, sweetheart," I just said. "I made your favorite this morning. Those little apple turnovers, and I thought maybe I'd drop some by later for the boys." And my daughter, my only daughter, the one I labored 31 hours to bring into this world, said, "Mom, please don't. We've actually decided to take a step back from you for a while. We need some space." I didn't drop the towel, because there was no towel. I just stood there with soapy hands dripping onto the linoleum, the same linoleum she used to do her homework on when she was 8, sprawled out on her stomach with her tongue between her teeth, working through long division. "A step back," I repeated. The words felt strange in my mouth, like a coin I'd never spent. "It's not personal," she said. And isn't that the funniest thing a daughter has ever said to her mother? Not personal. As if the relationship between the body that grew her and the body that grew from mine could be anything else. I asked her what brought this on. Calm, the way you ask a child why they're suddenly crying in the grocery store aisle? She gave me a list. I'd been overstepping. I'd been making comments about how she raised the boys. I'd been showing up unannounced. I'd been guilt-tripping her about Thanksgiving. I'd been, in her words, a lot to manage. 67 years old, and I'd become a thing to be managed. I told her I understood, even though I didn't. I told her to take all the space she needed, even though every cell in my body wanted to drive the 11 miles to her house and look her in the eye and ask what happened to the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. But I didn't. I just hung up, dried my hands properly this time, and sat down at the kitchen table. The apple turnovers were still on the counter, cooling on the wire rack. I'd been up since 5 making them. Henry, my late husband, used to say my pastry hands were a gift from God, that I had the right temperature for butter. He'd been gone 4 years that March. I still made his recipes like he might walk through the back door asking what smelled so good. I ate one of the turnovers standing at the counter. It was perfect. Of course it was. Then I scraped the rest into the trash, one by one, watching them break apart against the coffee grounds in the empty yogurt container. I don't know why I did that. I think I needed to see something I made get destroyed by my own hand, just so I'd know I was still capable of refusing to be useful. My daughter is named Whitney. She's 41. She lives in a craftsman bungalow in a neighborhood that used to be working class, but now has a wine bar where the hardware store used to be. Her husband does something with software that I've had explained to me 5 separate times and still couldn't tell you. They have 2 boys, 8 and 10, and those boys used to spend every other Saturday with me, baking and watching old movies and helping me weed the garden. They stopped coming about a year ago. Whitney said they had too many activities now. I said I could drive them to the activities. She said it was easier the other way. Easier. That word kept showing up. I sat at the kitchen table that afternoon for a long time. The clock above the stove ticked the way it always had, like a slightly drunk metronome. I watched the light shift across the wall, watched it climb the row of cookbooks Henry built shelves for, watched it pool on the photograph of my grandsons from 2 Christmases ago, the last one they spent at this house. And I thought about all the times I'd told myself she was just busy. She was just stressed. She was juggling a career in motherhood and a marriage and her own aging mother, and I needed to be patient. I needed to give her grace. I needed to bend a little more, ask a little less, take up a little less space at her dinner table and in her calendar and in her life. I'd been bending for a decade. I was practically folded in half, and she still wanted me smaller. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the bed I'd shared with Henry for 36 years and stared at the ceiling fan we'd installed the summer Whitney went to band camp. I thought about my mother. She died when I was 32. Fast, a stroke, no warning. I never got to be ungrateful to her. I never got to find her difficult. I would have given my right arm for one more Sunday dinner where she told me my casserole was too dry. And here was my daughter, with both her parents she'd had access to her whole life, treating me like an inconvenience she could schedule away. Around 2 in the morning, I got up and went to the closet in the spare bedroom. There's a metal box on the top shelf where I keep what I call my running tally. It's not anger, it's not even resentment exactly. It's a habit I picked up after Henry died, when I started noticing how easy it was to lose track of who owed what to whom. Not money, necessarily, just truth. I pulled it down and sat on the floor of that spare bedroom, the one that used to be Whitney's, and I opened the box. There were receipts in there. Not all of them, but enough. Tuition for her last year of college after she'd lost her scholarship, $15,000. The down payment on the bungalow, $42,000. The IVF treatments when she and her husband were trying for the second baby, $18,000. The roof after the hailstorm, $11,000. The summer her husband got laid off and I covered their mortgage for 4 months, $9,300. The trip to Hawaii for their anniversary because they really needed it, $6,000. Various dental bills, car repairs, summer camps, music lessons for the boys, that special tutor for the older one when he was struggling with reading. I added it up on a notepad. I'd never added it up before. I'd never wanted to know. It came to a little over $110,000. I sat there on the carpet of her old bedroom, looking at that number, and I started to laugh. Not the good kind. The kind that sounds like a hinge that needs oil. $110,000, and she needed space from me. Henry left me well taken care of. He'd worked 38 years at the same insurance company, the kind of pension that doesn't exist anymore, and he'd been smart with money in a way I never bothered to learn until I had to. The house was paid off. There was enough in the investment account that I could live the rest of my natural life and never worry, as long as I didn't do anything foolish. There was also a trust. Henry had set it up the year before he died, when the diagnosis came back and we both knew. Half went to me outright. The other half was set aside for Whitney and the boys, with conditions distributed at my discretion, fully revocable. He'd been very specific about that last part. Fully revocable, Eleanor, he'd said. And you can change the beneficiaries any time you want. I told him I'd never need to. He'd given me a look I didn't understand at the time. I understood it now. I didn't do anything that night. I just put the box back, closed the closet, went to bed, and I slept. Slept like I hadn't in months, maybe years. There's a particular kind of rest that comes when you finally stop pretending to yourself about something. The next morning, I called Henry's lawyer. He'd retired, but his daughter had taken over the practice, a woman named Bess who'd known us since she was a teenager. She remembered me. Of course she did. I made an appointment for the following Tuesday and didn't say what it was about. Then I called the bank. I had a standing automatic transfer that went to Whitney's checking account on the 1st of every month, $800. I'd set it up after Henry died because she said it would help with the boys' enrichment programs. I don't know why I never stopped it. Maybe because it felt like the last thing Henry and I did together. Even though Henry didn't really have anything to do with it, I just told myself he would have wanted to help. The young man on the phone was very nice. He asked me to verify some information. Then he said, "And what would you like to do with this transfer, ma'am?" "Cancel it," I said. "Effective when?" "Effective immediately." There was a pause. "Just so I'm sure I understand, you want to discontinue the monthly transfer permanently, starting now?" "Yes." "All right, Mrs. Caldwell, that's done." That was it, 23 seconds. It took me 10 years of mounting resentment and a single phone call telling me to stay away from my own grandchildren, and 23 seconds. I made myself an egg that morning. One egg with a piece of toast, and I sat on the back porch and ate it while the wrens fussed at each other in the hedge. The sun came up over the neighbor's elm and turned the dew into 1,000 small bright things. I thought, this is the first breakfast I have eaten purely for myself in maybe 40 years. Not while making someone else's breakfast. Not while thinking about what I needed to do for someone else after I ate. Just an egg and toast and me. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done. Who was there to tell? My sister lives in Tucson and we talk on Sundays, but she's been dealing with her own husband's dementia, and I didn't want to load her up. My friend from church, Patty, would have wanted to pray about it, and I wasn't ready to ask God for anything yet. I was still figuring out what I wanted. Whitney didn't call the next day. Or the day after that. The transfer would have hit on Tuesday morning, but she might not have noticed for a while. They have the kind of lifestyle where $800 disappearing isn't an immediate emergency. It's more of a slow puzzle. Tuesday morning, I went to Bess's office. It was in the same building it had always been in, downtown, 3rd floor, with that old elevator that groans like it's complaining about being asked to work. Bess had her father's same handshake, firm and warm, in the same way of getting right to the point without making you feel rushed. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Caldwell?" "I'd like to revise the trust," I said. "And I'd like to discuss what I can do about the house." She didn't blink. She got out a yellow legal pad. "Tell me what you're thinking." I told her. I told her about Whitney, in a controlled way, the way you describe a leak to a plumber. I told her about the trust, about the conditions, about my discretion as the trustee. I told her that I wanted to remove Whitney as a beneficiary entirely. I wanted the boys' portions held in trust until they were 25, with their grandmother, meaning me, retaining oversight. And I wanted the house to go to neither of them. I wanted to leave the house to the women's shelter, where I used to volunteer when Whitney was in high school. The one downtown, the one that had been operating out of that converted Victorian for 40 years and never had enough money. Bess wrote it all down. Then she looked up. "You're sure?" she said. "I am. Walk me through your reasoning, just so I have it on record." I told her about the phone call, about the space, about the way my grandsons hadn't been to my house in over a year, about the $110,000, about the way I'd been bending. I talked for a long time. She didn't interrupt me once. When I was finished, she said, "Eleanor, I want to be clear about something. What you're describing isn't an emotional decision. It's a clear-eyed one. I'll have these documents ready for you to sign on Friday." I almost cried then, but I didn't. I cried enough in the last week to last me a while. Instead, I shook her hand, and I walked out onto the street, and I went to the diner on the corner and ordered a piece of lemon meringue pie at 10:30 in the morning, like a woman with somewhere to be and nothing to apologize for. Whitney called Wednesday night. "Mom," she said. "Hi. Hey." "So, weird thing, the deposit didn't come through this month?" I wanted to make sure everything was okay with the account. "Everything's fine with the account," I said. There was a long pause. "Did the bank mess up the transfer?" "No," I said. "I canceled it." I heard her breathing change, the way it does when someone is calibrating. "You canceled it?" "Yes." "Mom, why would you do that without telling me?" "You told me you needed space," I said. "I assumed that included financial space." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear her husband in the background asking something. Whitney covered the receiver, muffled, came back. "That's not what I meant, and you know it." "What did you mean then? Help me understand." "I meant I needed you to back off about parenting and stop showing up at my house unannounced. Not whatever this is." I let that sit for a second. Then I said, "Whitney, I haven't shown up at your house unannounced in over 2 years. The last time I did was when your oldest had the flu and you asked me to bring soup. I'd like you to think about that for a minute." She didn't say anything, and I haven't commented on her parenting in a long time. The last time I did was when I suggested maybe the boys should have a bedtime that wasn't 10:30 on a school night, and that was when they were 6 and 8. I think I'm allowed one comment in 5 years. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she said. This defensive litigation of every single thing I say. It's exhausting. What's exhausting? I said slowly. Because I wanted to get this right, is being told I take up too much space by someone whose down payment I made, whose roof I replaced, whose marriage I subsidized in ways I never asked you to acknowledge. I'm not bringing it up to throw it in your face. I'm bringing it up because you've apparently been keeping a tally of my offenses. And I want you to know that I've been keeping a different kind of tally, and it doesn't balance the way you think it does. She was quiet. Then she said, "So this is what it is. You're punishing me with money." "No, sweetheart," I said, and I meant the sweetheart. I really did. "I'm just no longer paying for the privilege of being told I'm not wanted." She hung up. I made myself a cup of tea. I went out to the back porch. The wrens were still arguing in the hedge. I sat down in Henry's chair, the one he liked to read in on summer evenings, and I drank my tea, and I watched the light go down over the elm. She called back 3 times that night. I didn't answer. The next day, my son-in-law called. I'd never had much of a relationship with him, but he was always polite. His name is Brent. He's the kind of man who wears performance fleece everywhere, even to weddings. He started by saying he just wanted to understand what was going on, and could we maybe meet for coffee, just the 2 of us, no Whitney? I said no, politely. I told him I appreciated him reaching out, but this was between my daughter and me, and I didn't think dragging him into the middle of it would help anyone. He didn't push. He said, "I just want you to know that I love Whitney, but I think she handled this badly. I've told her so. The boys ask about you. They ask why we don't go to Grandma's anymore." That one almost broke me. I had to sit down. "What does she tell them?" I asked. "She says you're busy. She says you've busy. She says you've been distant." "Brent," I said, "I want you to do something for me. The next time the boys ask, I want you to tell them that Grandma is not distant. Tell them I love them. Tell them their grandfather loved them. Tell them my door is always open to them. And tell them, when they're old enough to understand, that I am not going anywhere and I am not who their mother says I am." He was quiet for a minute. Then he said, "Okay. And Brent, thank you for calling. Eleanor," he said. He almost never used my first name. "I think you should know. There's stuff she hasn't told you about money, about how things have been. I don't want to get in the middle of it, but just when you talk again, ask her about the credit card situation. Ask her about the loan they took out on the house last year." I thanked him again and hung up. I sat with that for a long time. I'd suspected. You don't help someone for a decade without sensing when the bottom of the bucket is leaking faster than you're pouring. But hearing it confirmed by her own husband was different. Friday, I signed the papers at Bess's office. New trust, new beneficiaries. The house to the shelter with a life estate retained by me, which meant I could live there as long as I wanted, and nobody could move me. The boys' portions tied up in education trusts, with me as trustee, accessible to them at 25 for any purpose, but inaccessible to their mother forever. It took 15 minutes. 15 minutes to undo a decade of assumptions about what would happen after I was gone. I walked out of that office and the air smelled like fall, even though it was only late September. There's a particular smell that comes when the leaves first start to think about turning, this dry sweetness, and I stood on the sidewalk and breathed it in. I'd brought a list of things I've been meaning to do for years. Not big things, just things. I went to the fabric store and bought a piece of linen I'd been eyeing for months, the color of weak tea. I went to the bookshop on Maple Street and bought 3 novels, all of them too long for someone my age to bother with, according to Whitney, who once told me I should stick to lighter reads. I bought a coffee from the place that charges $5 for a coffee, just to see what it tasted like. It tasted exactly like coffee. When I got home, there was a casserole dish on my porch. Whitney's casserole dish, the one she borrowed from me 18 months ago and never returned. There was a sticky note on it that just said, "Thought you might want this back." No name, no apology. Just my own dish, returned out of spite. I picked it up. It was heavier than I remembered. I carried it inside and put it on the counter. and looked at it for a long time. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I went out to the garage, got Henry's old toolbox, brought it inside, took out the heaviest hammer, and I broke that casserole dish into pieces on a piece of cardboard on my kitchen floor. I'm not a violent woman. I've never broken a dish in anger in my life. But I needed to. I needed to break something that belonged to her, in my house, on my time, while no one was watching. And then I needed to clean it up and throw it away and make myself a sandwich. So that's what I did. The next few weeks were the strangest of my life. Whitney didn't call. The boys didn't call, but I hadn't expected them to. Brent texted twice just to check in. Once to say the older one had asked again. Once to say he told them what I said about my door being always open. I started doing things I'd put off. I joined a walking group at the community center, women my age and older, most of them widowed, all of them with stories I wanted to hear. I started taking a watercolor class on Tuesday evenings. I was terrible at it. I loved it. I went to the symphony for the first time since Henry died, and I sat in the cheap seats by myself and I cried during the second movement of something I didn't know the name of, and the woman next to me handed me a tissue without making a thing of it. I got a dog. I'd wanted one for years. Whitney had always discouraged it. Mom, you can't handle a dog at your age. What if you fell? What if it ran away? Who would walk it? I went to the shelter, the same shelter that was now going to inherit my house, and I came home with a 6-year-old mutt named Boomer, who looked like someone had drawn a Labrador from memory after only seeing one once. He slept at the foot of my bed the first night and every night after. A month after the phone call, on a Saturday morning, my doorbell rang. I was in my robe still, drinking coffee, Boomer at my feet. I went to the door expecting a delivery. It was my grandson, the older one, 12 years old now. 11 months since I'd last seen him. He'd grown 4 inches. Hi, Grandma. Sweetheart, I said. He shifted on his feet. He had his father's tall awkwardness. Mom and Dad are in the car. Mom said I had to come to the door first. She said you should decide if we can come in. I looked past him. There was the car, idling at the curb. Whitney in the driver's seat looking straight ahead, hands at 10 and 2. Brent in the passenger seat. The younger boy in the back, waving at me. I looked at my grandson. He had his grandfather's eyes. I'd forgotten how much. Tell me something first, I said. Did you want to come? Yeah, he said. Then, I wanted to come for a long time, Grandma. Did she tell you why you couldn't? He thought about it. 12 years old, and trying to be honest. She said you were going through stuff. And then she said you were going through stuff. And then she said you were mad at us. But Dad said you weren't mad at us. He said you were mad at her, and that was different. I crouched down, even though my knees protested, and I put my hands on his shoulders. Your father is right, I said. I have never been mad at you, not for one single second of your whole life. Do you understand me? He nodded, eyes wet. You can come in, I said. All of you. But your mother and I are gonna need to have a talk, and you and your brother are gonna take the dog into the backyard while we have it. His name is Boomer. He loves to fetch. There's a tennis ball under the back deck. He smiled at that. Then he turned and waved the car in. Whitney came up the walk slowly. She looked older. She cried recently, I could tell. We don't lose the ability to read our own children's faces, no matter how grown they get. We didn't hug. She didn't try, and I didn't reach. The boys went to meet Boomer. Brent went with them, giving us space, pretending to be interested in the dog. Whitney stood in my kitchen, the kitchen where I'd taught her to make pancakes when she was 4, and she said, I need to tell you some things, and I need you to listen. I'm listening. She told me. She told me about the credit card debt, almost $40,000. She told me about the second mortgage they'd taken out that Brent hadn't wanted to take out that she'd insisted on for renovations to the kitchen she now hated. She told me about the way her husband had told her 6 months ago, that she was treating her own mother the way her mother-in-law had treated her, and how that had landed like a slap, and how she'd done nothing with the information because the truth of it was unbearable. She told me about the therapist she'd started seeing 2 weeks after our phone call. She told me what the therapist had said about projection, about repeating patterns, about the way some women punish their mothers for their own choices. "I'm not asking you to undo anything," she said. "Brent told me you've been to see a lawyer," he guessed. "I don't blame him. I don't blame you either. I'm just here because my son asked me every single night for 3 weeks when we were going to see Grandma, and I couldn't keep being the reason he didn't." I let her stand there for a minute. I let her see me not rushing to comfort her. Then I said, "I'm glad you came. I'm glad the boys are in my backyard right now. I want to be very clear with you, Whitney. I love you. I will always love you. But I'm not who I was a month ago. The woman who paid for things she shouldn't have paid for and apologized for things she didn't do. That woman is gone. I don't know if you're going to like the woman who's here now. I'm still meeting her myself." She nodded. She was crying quietly, the way she cried as a child when she didn't want me to know she was crying. "The transfers aren't coming back," I said. "The trust has been changed. We can talk about the boys, about education, about how to make sure they have what they need. But it's going to be on my terms now, and it's going to be transparent, and you don't get to threaten me with my own grandchildren ever again." "I didn't think I was," she whispered. "I know you didn't think you were. That's part of what we have to work on." We talked for another 20 minutes. Not about everything, not even close, just about how often and what kind of visits and whether I could come to the boys' baseball games this spring. We made a tentative plan. I didn't trust the plan, but I trusted myself to enforce it now, and that was new. Before they left, the younger boy came inside with grass stains on his knees and asked if I still had the recipe for the snickerdoodles. I told him I did, and that the next time he came over, I would teach him to make them himself because it was time. He hugged me around the middle. He smelled like he always had, like a child who'd been outside. After they were gone, I sat on the porch with Boomer. The light was starting to slant the way it does in October. I thought about how I'd almost lost this. Not just my daughter, but myself. How close I'd come to spending the rest of my life folded in half, $800 at a time, until there was nothing left of me but a casserole dish someone returned out of spite. The thing nobody tells you about getting older is that you don't get less brave. You get more. There's less to lose and so much to finally claim. Every year that passes is another year you could spend being smaller or being yourself. After a certain point, you have to choose. I chose myself. I should have chosen sooner, but I chose. If you've been waiting for permission to stop bending, you're not going to get it from the people who benefit from your bending. You're going to have to give it to yourself. And it might cost you something. It might cost you a relationship, at least the version of it that was costing you everything. But what you find on the other side of that costing is your own life, the one you forgot you were allowed to have. Mine started at 67 on a Tuesday morning with 1 egg and a piece of toast and a wren fussing in the hedge. It's never too late. It's just never any earlier than right now. I have thought about that phone call many times since. The soapy hands, the cold coffee, the apple turnovers cooling on the wire rack. I have turned it over in my mind the way you turn over a stone in the garden, looking at what lives underneath. And what I keep coming back to is this. Whitney did not stop loving me on a Tuesday morning. She stopped respecting me a long time before that, and I did not notice because I was too busy proving I was worth keeping. That is the part nobody warns you about. When you spend 40 years showing someone that your love comes with no limits, they eventually believe you, and then they treat you accordingly. It is not cruelty exactly. It is logic. I taught my daughter the lesson, and she learned it. The $110,000 did not buy me closeness. It bought me invisibility, dressed up as gratitude she never quite got around to expressing. I think about cause and effect now in a way I did not before. Every time I said yes when I meant no, I taught her that my no was negotiable. Every time I covered something she should have handled herself, I robbed her of the dignity of handling it. The woman who showed up at my door in October with 2 boys and a husband and a confession, she was, in part, my making. I had a hand in raising someone who could call her own mother a thing to be managed. That is not a comfortable thing to admit, but it is true, and the truth is what finally let me change. What I want anyone listening to understand is that bending is not the same as loving. Yielding is not the same as nurturing. I confused those things for most of my adult life. I thought a good mother was one who never said the hard word. But the hard word, said in time, is sometimes the most loving thing in a household. The hard word is what teaches children that other people are real. Without it, they grow up thinking the world is a soft place built around their convenience. I do not regret breaking that casserole dish on my kitchen floor. I do not regret canceling the transfer or changing the trust. Those were not acts of revenge. They were acts of self-respect, arriving late, but arriving. And the strange and beautiful thing is, once I started respecting myself, Whitney started seeing me again, not because I forced her to, but because there was finally something solid for her to look at. You cannot really see someone who is folded in half, trying not to take up space. Be brave enough to disappoint the people who only love your usefulness. Be wise enough to know the difference between giving and bleeding. Be steady enough to hold a boundary even when the person on the other side of it is someone you grew inside your own body. Your life does not belong to your children. It belongs to you, and what you do with what remains of it is the last great act of authorship you have left. I am 67, and I am finally the author. It is a quieter freedom than I expected, but it is mine.